Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're diving straight into something that unites literally every single one of us. We're talking about that universal and, let's be honest, sometimes completely terrifying human fascination with the great unknown. Like, what actually happens after we die? It's the ultimate 3 a.m. question, right? You know the feeling. You're just staring at the ceiling in the dark, and suddenly you feel the sheer weight of eternity pressing down on you. We're all just trying desperately to comprehend the incomprehensible. It's such a fundamental part of the human experience to wonder where we go when the lights finally turn off.
And in this incredibly raw and relatable discussion over on the r/existentialism thread, one user absolutely nailed this terror. User Wooden Scallion 2943 wrote, "It's nothing, no thoughts, no feelings, a state impossible to imagine." And man, reading that, they arrived at this logical deduction of death as just this black oblivion, and it triggered this massive, relatable wave of existential dread across the whole community. Because it's the ultimate fear, isn't it? Just not existing anymore? It's a concept so vast, so completely empty, that our brains basically short-circuit trying to even process it. All right, let's look at section 1, the fear of nothingness, and dealing with existential dread.
Okay, let's really dive into this. How do we, as humans, grapple with this terrifying idea of non-existence? It basically sets up this massive conflict between our subjective feelings, our deep internal desire to just keep going, and the objective reality of our physical bodies. Now, to understand why this is so remarkably hard to parse, we're going to pivot to our main academic source for this explainer. This is from Oxford philosopher Stephen Priest, specifically his paper, God and Some Limits of Science. Priest's rigorous work gives us a really fascinating theoretical framework for why science, despite all its breathtaking advancements, actually struggles to soothe this exact existential dread. He argues that there are just fundamental limits built right into the very nature of scientific inquiry. I want you to break the fourth wall with me for a second here. Seriously, hold up your hands and really look at them. Look at the lines on your palms. Priest argues that there are these profound questions that science simply cannot solve. And the first one is, why is anything you? Think about that for a second. All the scientific facts about your genetics, your upbringing, your environment, none of that actually explains why this specific internal consciousness is anchored in your specific body, viewing the world from your precise vantage point. Science can map the brain beautifully, but it literally cannot find the you that's experiencing it. All right, here's a second question to overwhelm you slightly. Is there free will? Do you actually control your actions, or are you just a highly complex biological machine playing out a predetermined script? If you look at human beings purely through the lens of physics and chemistry, well, every action is just a reaction to a previous event. Science gives us cause and effect, sure, but it genuinely struggles to account for true, spontaneous agency, the idea that a human being actively authors a completely original choice. And let's complete this little barrage by zooming all the way out to the cosmos. Why is there a universe? Why is there anything at all instead of absolutely nothing? This really simulates that exact spiraling existential crisis felt by that Reddit community. Science can trace everything back to the Big Bang, right? But it completely stumbles on why that singularity existed in the first place. When you push these questions to their absolute limits, you realize we're basically standing on the edge of a massive intellectual cliff. So the crucial point here is how Priest actually defines science. He says science is a grammatically third-person, predictive, nomological, which just means based on strict laws of nature, and naturalistic inquiry. It absolutely requires observation and measurement from the outside. And that strictly third-person nature, that's exactly why it hits a brick wall on deeply personal first-person questions. Science can expertly explain the mechanics of the universe, but it simply cannot explain the subjective inner experience of the scientist who's actually observing it. Which brings us to section 2, the subjective limits, or what we call the view from now here. Priest identifies a major boundary here. There are deeply subjective, intimate experiences that are simply way too close to us to be measured by third-person scientific tools. I mean, you can't exactly put meanness under a microscope. And this brilliantly illustrates the divide. Science asks, why is this human being the way it is? A scientist can map out your DNA, your social background, your neurology. But science cannot answer, why is this human being you? Why aren't you just your exact doppelganger? From an objective standpoint, there's no difference. But from your view, what Priest playfully calls the view from now here, as in right now and right here, the difference is absolute. It is your unique consciousness. Let's look at free will again.
Priest defines it as agency with the possibility of refraining. Classical deterministic science suggests everything is just this inevitable chain reaction. But Priest neutrally points out something we all know. Anyone who has ever faced an agonizing moral dilemma knows subjectively that they are making a real, difficult choice. If you have to choose whether to turn off a loved one's life support, the cold determinism of classical science is completely useless to you. The burden of that choice feels utterly, undeniably real.
So what does this mean for our Reddit users' fear of nothingness? Well, walk with me step by step through Priest's logical deduction here. He calls this the argument from parts regarding the soul. Step 1. Only things with parts can be physically destroyed by dissolving into those parts. Think of it like taking a car apart piece by piece. Step 2. Meanness, your absolute inner space, your pure consciousness, has no physical parts. It is totally indivisible. Therefore, step 3. Meanness cannot be naturally destroyed. Priest deduces that this subjective interiority has to survive death, simply because it isn't made of physical matter that's even capable of decomposing.
Let's shift gears to Section 3, the objective limits, focusing on macroscopic mysteries.
Let's zoom out from those intimate mysteries of the human mind to Priest's macro-level mysteries of the universe itself. These are questions that are just too objective, too macroscopic for science to fully grasp. To see this, let's look at the origin of the universe. What actually caused the Big Bang? Priest highlights this concept called causa sui, the idea that the Big Bang caused itself. But that's logically contradictory, right? Because something has to exist before it can create itself. On the flip side, an entirely uncaused event defies all scientific explanation because science fundamentally relies on cause and effect. So it leaves this massive objective blind spot in our understanding of reality.
Then there's this mind-bending concept of the now. Priest defines the now as the eternal present, the time when anything that happens happens. The scientifically inexplicable mystery here is that you, personally, are the exact dividing line between the entirety of the elapsed past and the unelapsed future. Why are you endowed with such immense personal cosmological significance? Science has incredibly complex equations for space and time, for sure, but it has literally no mathematical equation for the subjective now that you are experiencing this very second.
And finally, what is it to be? Priest defines being as that which nothing lacks. He breaks down the argument that pure being must necessarily exist because claiming that pure nothingness exists is actually a logical contradiction. You can't really say nothingness is doing something or nothingness exists because existing is an action and absolute absence cannot act. So by logical default, something must necessarily exist in the universe. Moving right along to Section 4, the theological answer, framed as a logical necessity. We are at the ultimate crossroad of this explainer. Priest argues that because these subjective and objective limits cannot be solved by natural predictive science, they logically point toward a very specific theoretical framework. And he doesn't state this as some leap of blind faith, but as a rigorous philosophical necessity. He neutrally reports his deductions. The cause of the Big Bang must be timeless. The eternal now is the presence of God. The perfect immaterial nature of mathematics is the mind of God. And humans, possessing an indivisible consciousness, possess an immortal soul. So for Priest, the limits of science mathematically and logically necessitate the existence of God and immortality. And finally, Section 5, the existential answer, or forging our own meaning. Let's pivot rapidly from all that dense academic theology right back to the raw, messy humanity of that Reddit thread. Because, while philosophers are off writing papers, everyday people are just trying to cope with these exact same unknowns while going about their daily lives. This brings us to the secular existentialist viewpoint from that same Reddit community. One user argued, and I quote, "It makes way more sense to me that our consciousness is nothing more than a byproduct of evolution. It's up to you, and you alone, to decide what's important. In a universe without a divine safety net, humans are free agents. It's a completely different, remarkably active way to frame the great unknown." A Reddit moderator actually perfectly captured this feeling by sharing that famous quote from Jean-Paul Sartre, "Man is condemned to be free." It's a heavy burden, isn't it? I mean, if there's no objective judge, no predetermined meaning woven into the cosmos, then you are completely responsible for your own life. And yeah, that is terrifying for sure, but it's also incredibly empowering. You are the sole author of your own meaning. What you care about matters simply because you choose to care about it.
So we really have two distinct paths forward when facing the great unknown here. On one side, we have Stephen Priest's theological deductions, this rigorous, structured philosophical logic defining a timeless creator, a mathematical order, and an immortal soul that cannot be destroyed. And on the exact opposite side, we have the Reddit community's existential freedom, a very individual, earthly humanity that just accepts our fleeting, fragile existence and fully embraces the responsibility of forging our own meaning in the dark.
Which brings us to our final question, prompted by a surprisingly profound and, honestly, kind of humorous analogy from a Reddit user. If we are wedged between a state of non-existence before birth and potential non-existence after death, what are you going to do with your slice of the life sandwich? Whatever the ultimate truth of the universe actually is, you have this present moment. How will you choose to experience it?